So, when future historians look back at the collapse of the US empire, they're going to wonder what was the exact year when it all started to fall apart. And they might even look at this year, who knows. But if you were to ask me, I think the exact year is 2001. And the collapse didn't happen in the heartland America, it happened in the middle of nowhere in a place called Afghanistan. But to understand this story, we need to understand that Afghanistan has a nickname. It is known as the Graveyard of Empires. And if you go back to 1839, the height of the British Empire, they're the first ones kind of checking out Afghanistan. They're thinking, this place is just north of our big colony in India. We're worried that the Russian Empire might come down and, start snapping up some of our Indian colony. We'd like a buffer state. And they start eyeing off a little area south of the Himalayas called Afghanistan. They go in there for the usual colonial reasons. There's resources there. They got copper and iron. They've also got a really big world famous textile industry already. Afghan carpets, Afghan textiles. But there's also the opium fields. There's lots of them. And at this point, Britain is really looking for opium. It's already growing it in abundance in northern India and using it to send all the way to China to destabilize the Qing dynasty. We did a whole video on that a while back on the Opium Wars. But at this point, the British Empire is turning into a drug cartel and they can't get enough opium. So they figure we can take Afghanistan, block off the Russians from coming down into India, and we can control the world trade of opium. It's win-win, and it should be a pretty easy task. It is not. The British go into Afghanistan and they're immediately met by all of the tribes in Afghanistan, especially the Pashtun tribes. They have their own flavor and warrior code, which makes them incredibly tough. It's called Pashtunwali. The Pashtunwali belief is basically, we believe in hospitality and looking after guests and protecting guests. We also believe in revenge. If someone betrays us or comes into our home and betrays us or, say, invades us, they're going to have a bad time. And the British Army do. More than 17,000 British troops will be killed in ambushes and guerrilla warfare waged predominantly by the Pashtun people. And this will be the biggest loss the British will face all the way up until the Second World War. And it'll be the first time the British really get their ass kicked by a country they're trying to colonize. But Britain is, of course, still a very big and powerful country. And eventually they manage to fight the Afghans down into a treaty and basically say, hey, Afghanistan, you don't have to become a full colony, but we're going to control all of your foreign relations and foreign policy. You're going to do the empire's bidding. The Afghans think, good enough, whatever, as long as you guys get out of the country. The British do, and then about 20 seconds later, the Afghans go, okay, we don't care about any of that. We're going to trade with whoever we want. Hey, the Russian envoys come back. Let's go be friends with them. The British, of course, hate this, and they go back in. They get their asses kicked again. But this time, the British think, okay, we're going to start dividing this place up. And the British, of course, are famous for their divide and conquer tactics, which they love to use against all the colonies they take. And they basically draw a huge line and a border right through the middle of the Pashtun areas. And they are divided. They're still divided to this day. The southern part is in Pakistan and the north is in Afghanistan. Britain will still semi-control Afghanistan all the way up until 1919, when after the First World War, Britain is very weak at this point. They are out of money. They have had a lot of dead from that war, and there's not really much will in them to keep fighting. The Afghans notice this, and they are the first to get in line to overthrow their colonial overlords. And this time, Afghanistan will actually be free. And over the next, say, 50 odd years, Afghanistan will go through a very interesting change, as all of the countries that border them have very, very different policies. You've got the Soviet Union on one part and all of the agitprop and communism that's coming in over the border because of that. You've also got communist China that's also doing the same, but their own version of Maoism. You've also got neo-colonialism coming from the British and Americans, and they're the ones who are first going to get into Afghanistan and basically do what they do everywhere else in neocolonialism. Here's all the loans. We're going to send US aid in to come and develop places. But really all they're doing is just building roads between the mines and the major trading hubs and then the ports to just take all the resources out of Afghanistan. Living under this neo-colonial capitalist system doesn't do the Afghan people any good. They're still basically living in a feudal society and none of the money is making it to them. This makes them a ripe climate for socialism and communism to take control, and it does. This will eventually culminate in a revolution in Afghanistan led by the People's Democratic People of Afghanistan, the PDPA, and they will take over and they'll do the usual socialist stuff. They'll increase the literacy rate, champion women's rights, start land reclamation to give the peasants and workers direct land and direct control of their work and produce, and the standard of living in Afghanistan starts to go up. Of course, America cannot stand this, as they always do. They have to crush any kind of socialist movement. So America start funding ultra-nationalist Islamic forces, and it's purely cynical. This has really nothing to do with Islam. They just need conservative forces to go and re-establish capitalist control. The CIA will send funding what would become the Mujahideen, and they would unify Afghanistan under a singular rule, and then they would take over control of Afghanistan while crushing the revolution that had been brewing. This will lead to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, as they're trying to actually uphold the PDPA, which for all intents and purposes is actually the legitimate government of Afghanistan. The Soviets will try and do that, but of course, this is Afghanistan. They don't really like anyone invading them, whether it's the US or Britain or the Soviet Union, and they start fighting them as well. This will be a common theme in Afghanistan, and eventually the Soviets will be beaten back and they'll be forced to leave, and then the US is basically won at this point, and they decide, okay, we can just leave Afghanistan alone. The Mujahideen will merge into the Taliban, and then they'll basically just ignore everything the US says. So then in 2001, after 9/11 and the war on terror, the US will go back to just clean up house. They'll do the same in Iraq. Saddam Hussein is also a puppet of the US. So let's just go and remind them who's in charge. But they should learn the lesson by now that Afghanistan really doesn't like anyone coming and telling them what to do. And over the next 20 years, the Taliban will smash the US occupation of their homeland, and eventually they will win their independence. This will basically bring us to where we are now. The Taliban are in charge, for better or for worse, and we don't really know what the future holds for Afghanistan, but hopefully it is something good and they can rediscover the lost value of the PDPA. But I'll leave you with a quote that was found graffitied on a wall in Kabul in 2022 that said, "They've tried kings, communists and jihadis. Next is workers' power." And I think that that's a beautiful little thing. And hopefully that gives us a lot of hope for Afghanistan's future. Anyway, if you want to hear me ramble on about more on this subject, this is actually the second podcast I've created, or I go on about it for 40 minutes. Head to patreon.com/Triploy and you will find the Triploy podcast, where I talk all about Afghanistan and the graveyard of empires. And hopefully this has given you something to think about.